This episode contains graphic descriptions of crime scenes which may be disturbing to some listeners.
In the 1990s, one man transformed bank robberies into something far more dangerous. He wasn't a desperate criminal looking for a quick payday. He was bold, calculated, and arrogant. His crimes would make him Central New York's public enemy number one, and would launch one of the most intensive investigations the region had ever seen.
This is APB Behind the Badge. Here's your host, former police chief Mark Spahn.
Our story begins on Wednesday, April 17, 1996. It's around 11:38 a.m. A call comes into the Fulton Police Department, located about 30 minutes north of Syracuse. The call is about a bomb threat. All available units are dispatched to the west side of the city. Minutes later, a man enters the Fleet Bank on Route 481. He's tall, about 6'3", late 20s to mid-30s, with an athletic build. He's wearing a Georgetown jacket, ball cap, blue jeans, gloves, and a Ronald Reagan Halloween mask. He's carrying a dark mail bag and a revolver. He orders the employees out of the back office and onto the floor. When one customer's slow to respond, the robber grabs him, throws him to the ground, and kicks him hard. There's a total of 2 customers and 5 employees inside the bank. He gives 2 tellers each a cloth bag and demands they fill them with money from the bottom drawer and no die packs. This guy is no amateur. He grabs the bags full of cash to the tune of over $18,000. On his way out, he turns to the tellers and says, "You've been most helpful, ladies. Now what I suggest you do is duck." As he nears the front door of the bank, he detonates a military smoke grenade. And as he's walking out of the bank, 3 people in a car stare at this masked man as he heads towards them in the parking lot next to the bank. The robber raises his gun and fires 4 to 5 rounds into their car. Then he's seen by another witness getting into a red Ford Escort and driving away. The bank manager activates the alarm, which goes right to the Fulton PD. I was working as a sergeant in the Criminal Investigations Division when that call came in. The desk sergeant on duty gave me a heads up. Now, it's not uncommon that there's an accidental alarm activation when bank employees are opening or closing for the day. But this one was midday, and I'd already worked a couple of what we call note jobs around the same time, where a robber presents a note to the teller demanding money. So I quickly left for the bank, assuming that the patrols would be on scene well before me. What I didn't know was that they'd be coming from the bomb threat call on the other side of the city. By the time I pulled up in my unmarked car, I didn't see any patrol units. I was also looking for the prearranged signal from the bank indicating it was okay to enter the building. This signal is used by bank staff and police after a bank alarm's triggered. And while I'm not going to divulge what the signal was, I didn't see it. So I discreetly walked up to a corner of the building to look inside. Our protocol was to make sure that any threats had left the bank. You don't want to create a hostage situation. But as I tried to look through one window, I thought they must have the curtains drawn. So I moved to the next window to check inside. Again, what looked like red curtains. So I advanced closer toward the main entrance. It was then that I recognized the bank manager with the OK signal. I reholstered my .45 and immediately noticed that as the manager was holding the door open for me, red smoke was billowing out from inside the bank. The robber had detonated that smoke grenade as he left. So the red curtains blocking my view inside was smoke. The initial police response to the bank alarm was slower than usual because patrols had been dispatched 10 minutes before to that bomb threat on the opposite side of the city. It would turn out that the bomb threat had been called into the fire department by the robber. It was a diversion tactic, and it worked. As it turned out, that bomb threat call would bring our first break in the case, but we'll get to that a little later. At the time, John Winslow was a special agent with the FBI in Syracuse. He'd previously worked on the FBI's bank robbery squad in New York City. I met with John within the hour following the bank robbery. He brought us some background information they had on other robberies thought to be connected to the one in Fulton. He told me about a string of Central New York bank robberies that began in 1991 in the cities and towns surrounding Syracuse. Most reported an armed, masked male robber, but there were a couple involving a second male who entered the bank with him. Here's John Winslow.
We knew we had a pattern. He sounded like a white guy, tall, 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", lean, always masked up. We called him closing time because he'd hit it right around 4 o'clock. When the banks were getting ready to close, he would go in.
So the robber had been dubbed the closing time bandit, but the latest robbery in Fulton took place at 11:48 in the morning. Different guy? Maybe not. The suspect was seen speeding away from the bank in a red Ford Escort. Same vehicle description as in 2 previous bank robberies linked to the closing time bandit. That red Ford Escort was used as a getaway in the February 1995 robbery of the Fleet Bank in the town of Cicero, where, during his escape, the robber slid off the road and abandoned the vehicle, which was impounded by the sheriff's department. And a red Ford Escort surfaced again in the summer of that same year. It was used as a getaway from the U.S. Federal Credit Union holdup in the town of Clay. And now, another red Ford Escort was identified as the getaway from the Fulton robbery. It was found about 30 minutes later, abandoned in a hospital parking lot just 2 blocks from the bank. And this is where another witness saw the robber switching cars and was able to provide a better description: that he had short, wavy brown hair, blue eyes, and was good-looking. Fulton PD impounded the red Ford Escort, which now had a Delaware license plate on it that had been stolen just months before. But when I went to run the VIN number, I received a DMV message saying that the car was already impounded. I gave the Onondaga County Sheriff's Office a call. Carl Reschke was a detective with the Sheriff's Office.
I get a call from probably Gene Conway and says that you need to reach out to Mark Spawn in Fulton. They just had another robbery and they think that they have a car that we should have in the impound lot. One of my academy mates is the sergeant in charge of property, so I call him directly. And a few minutes later, he comes out and with a rather sunken voice says, "It's gone."
So we started processing the car in our impound, and because I was the fingerprint guy, I spent hours poring over that car, determined that I'd find latent prints somewhere, even if in the most inconspicuous parts of the car. But there was nothing. That stealing back of a stolen car out of police impound, that's not the behavior of a typical bank robber. It was deliberate, almost theatrical, a brazen move that made no practical sense unless it wasn't about the car at all. It seemed that the closing time bandit was sending a message, taunting investigators, staying one step ahead, and turning the hunt into a psychological game. His behavior had also become increasingly aggressive, more threatening, and more violent. He had guns, and he was willing to use them. It was time to get all of the law enforcement agencies on the same page. The special agent in charge of the FBI Syracuse field office, Mike Mason, quickly assembled a Bank Robbery Task Force to identify and apprehend Central New York's public enemy number 1. So now, 30 years later, I reached out to my former colleagues from the Bank Robbery Task Force to help me tell this story. Again, retired FBI agent John Winslow.
Mike called in everybody, and I asked Eddie Grant, the state police lieutenant, I said, "You think the troopers will be involved?" And he said, "If the FBI is running it, they will." And so Mike Mason really put it together, and we got the offsite for us.
The offsite location was strategically located in a spot where we had quick access to locations where prior robberies had occurred. Our new office was in a storefront under a fictitious business name, and that was where we worked, all under one roof during the summer of 1996. And the synergy of our team would help to catapult this investigation to the next level. Task force members included FBI, state police, Syracuse, Fulton, and Clay police, and the sheriff's offices from Onondaga and Oswego counties. From the investigation of the Fulton bank robbery, we had the witness at the hospital parking lot where the bank robber changed cars. That witness would give us our first look at what our suspect really looked like without a mask. You can see the sketch in our show notes. But we still didn't know who he was or who his accomplices were, if any. But we were confident that the bomb threat was a diversion tactic by the bank robber, and we hoped that would provide a clue. John Winslow.
Phil Looney said, "We probably use a cell phone. Why don't we get subpoenas for all the cell phone companies?"
And in those cell phone records was the call made for the bomb threat. And it came from a phone belonging to a Mary Galvin of Liverpool, New York. And Mary Galvin had a husband named Ronald Peterson. Now we had something to go on, and the work began. 42-year-old Ronald Peterson matched the descriptions given by bank employees and others, and there was another keen observation by a witness that fit Peterson.
But we were thinking it may have been a cop because the one witness where he dropped the red Escort, she saw him through the rearview mirror and she said he walked like a cop. Yeah, he was a cop down in Fairfax County, which is a good police agency. He got let go from there because he ran a airplane leasing company. And the first plane that he leased was picked up by the DEA for smuggling drugs.
So we had the names Ronald Peterson and Mary Galvin and the address of their home in the village of Liverpool, about 5 miles outside of Syracuse. Again, here's retired detective Carl Reschke.
Once they identified the address where she had the house there on First Street, I was the closest guy that lived to the residence. So I shopped in that area. I was always through there doing baseball or running around with the kids. And I saw him walking hand in hand with his daughter one day out in front of the house, because of the fact, as John had laid out, that he was tall, 6'3", 6'4", and he used to step over those half doors that separated the bank from the tellers. He never needed to open the door. He just stood over it. And I looked, I said, oh my God, we've got the guy. There was no mistaking his being the bank robber.
Part of the investigation was to go back over each previous bank robbery to establish a connection to the suspect, Ronald Peterson. You can see a timeline of the robberies in our show notes. But let's go back to what we thought at the time was the fourth robbery at the Marine Midland Bank in North Syracuse in December 1994. There were 2 robbers in the bank that day, both armed. They ordered employees and customers to the floor. One robber stood guard while the other vaulted the counter, demanding to know who the head teller was and made her fill a gym bag with cash. They got away with more than $50,000. The MO was similar, and Ronald Peterson matched the general description of the man who vaulted the counter. If it was him, who was the other man? Earlier that same year, in June of 1994, there was another robbery that investigators suspected was connected to Peterson. That day, 2 female employees of the Marine Midland Northern Lights Mall were refilling the ATM. One of them came out to test the ATM when she was suddenly accosted by a man who was waiting in the bushes and forced her back inside where the other employee was standing. Both women had their hands bound behind their backs and bags placed over their heads. You'll remember that I said the robbers were rehearsed and used threats and intimidation. This time, the robber practically paralyzed one of the women with fear. John Winslow.
He knows her name, he knows her child's name, and he knows where the child is kept for daycare, and says, if you give any trouble, we'll kill your little girl.
Could Ronald Peterson be that robber? Our task force needed to know everything they could about him and any potential accomplices, including Mary Galvin. Even though Peterson's physical description lined up with many of the robberies, at that point we had no direct proof, and it wasn't likely that we'd get any voluntary confessions. The other thing was, we needed to keep a watchful eye on his every move in order to prevent the next robbery. Former Onondaga County Sheriff's Detective Carl Reschke.
I mean, gentlemen, as we recall, this was our work schedule. If the banks were open, we were working, because there were no days off thinking that he wasn't going to hit at any time.
It became apparent that Peterson had a stash of getaway cars, and several of the surveillances we conducted involved us watching him as he checked the many stolen cars he had staged around the region, usually at hotels. One afternoon, I was in the surveillance van at a hotel when Mary Galvin drove Peterson into the parking lot. I watched as Peterson carefully walked around to 2 different vehicles while carrying a small black briefcase. That's where he kept his license plates. His staged cars were usually backed up to shrubs or trees, something that gave him some privacy when he switched the plates. And he was careful, always wearing gloves and always eyeing the parking lot. He was alert and suspicious. Retired Fulton Police Lieutenant Russ Johnson.
I remember one time he was changing his license plates into Sheridan. I was in the van. I was looking through the periscope at him and watched him come up to the van. He literally came and knocked on the van door, and I was like, oh God. Eventually what ended up happening is he got security on me. And it was the middle of summer, and I just kept quiet and kept sweating profusely. And within a matter of minutes, somebody else was knocking on the door, and it was security of the of the Sheridan. I still didn't answer. I just stayed in there, but and then they both just went away. He was very cautious. That guy was so meticulous, so methodical.
Those were just a couple of many surveillances we conducted over the course of 2.5 months. We started early in the morning, and we were often out until late at night when, as we called it, we put them to bed. There were days when nothing happened, but we never knew when he'd decide to hit again. Most of the task force surveilled Peterson on the ground, tracking him from one place to another. But we also had a plane that was manned by one of our task force members, Town of Clay Police Detective Chris Wood.
And there was a point when he was up in Watertown with his wife. And you got to remember, this guy's got an aviation background. And we were watching him. I'm watching him through the binocular, and he's looking straight up at us as we're doing orbits. So we scooted off from where he was looking up at us. He would know that the flight pattern that we were in might be a little suspicious.
During one of those surveillance days, Peterson, his wife Mary Galvin, and their daughter stopped for lunch, and Onondaga County Sheriff Detective Val Brogan was there.
They asked me to go into McDonald's and had me sit at a table just to see if I could hear anything, because I was quite pregnant, and they felt that they would not even suspect that I was law enforcement. So I was in an adjacent table just trying to see if we could capture any information, because we knew he was casing banks.
Detective Brogan told me she didn't hear any direct conversations, but she did note that they seemed to be whispering back and forth. But outside of that, they appeared to be just a normal family. On August 8, 1996, several months after the Fulton robbery, Peterson was casing banks in the Watertown, New York area. The Bank Robbery Task Force was again watching him, and now listening to his phone calls. Mary Galvin and Peterson met in a parking lot of the local hospital, where Peterson gets on a bicycle and rides to a bank, and then he sat there for what Agent Winslow said was the longest time. Then Peterson decides to test the police response time in that area. But this time, instead of a bomb threat, he reports 2 men with a shotgun. He calls it into a business in the vicinity of the bank.
He called it into the store instead of calling 911, which they'd be able to trace it. So the store called the Watertown PD. They go over, they don't see anybody, but he was just testing to see what kind of reaction they would have.
There was a significant and swift response to the call, and maybe that's why Peterson decided not to do that robbery. So even though it appears that the robbery is off for the day, the task force continued the surveillance of both Ronald Peterson and Mary Galvin as they head back towards Syracuse on Interstate 81. Val Brogan.
What I recall is when we were on our way back from Watertown, we were following him back to Syracuse, we believed. He was southbound on 81.
Carl Reschke.
As we're following him at warp speed, our state police investigator notifies the trooper working radar, and Peterson gets off at the parish exit.
A couple of us got off with him, and he was looking all over the place, and we're all getting off the road at different times so someone else could take the lead.
Did Peterson know he was being followed?
Because we figured that he was now scanning the band too to hear what's going on with all the units.
Peterson heads west off the exit ramp, so some of the surveillance team heads east. Maybe it was his way of checking for a tail, but Peterson doubles back. But that puts him directly behind Detective Val Brogan.
And I ended up getting off the road because it was country roads, and I went behind a building to hide basically until we could get back into surveillance mode.
But Peterson pulls behind the same building. Retired Lieutenant Russ Johnson.
I was the closest to Val when she radioed that he's coming, he's following me. And she pulled into the lot, and he pulled in after her, and I'm flying there because I'm so concerned that this could turn bad really quickly.
And I remember, oh my goodness, I had my gun out. I remember putting it in my lap, and I'm like, here I am, very pregnant, and I didn't know what was going to happen.
Every second that it's taken me to get there is just driving in the concern even harder that this could go bad. By the time I got there, it looked like he was just pulling out, and Val was okay.
They took a look at me and they just left.
It was a big relief when I got there and saw that he was pulling out, he was leaving, and there was not an issue.
So maybe that didn't make him suspicious, but he definitely got off the exit because he was suspicious that he was being followed. So something did spook him.
We had originally thought after that incident that now this thing is going to have to come to an end, or we're going to have to back it off somehow.
And they were considering pulling the plug and maybe even taking him down at that point. They felt we had enough evidence because, he had been staging stolen cars and we had started collecting that information.
So did Peterson take it as just coincidence, or did he actually make the surveillance?
And I remember Mason saying, you know what? I don't think she was burned. They felt, no, I think we're good.
Next day it was, let's go, let's keep on going. Cameras were around the house. We were on it.
Let's just watch for like the next 24 hours. And then he got right back to business. And that's when he started going west to Rochester and started casing banks there.
Peterson spent a considerable amount of time around Rochester getting ready for that next robbery. Again, there were getaway vehicles staged in the area. One of them, a van stolen from a military recruiting office. And then came Thursday, August 15, 1996. Retired FBI Special Agent Rob Haley.
I don't know, I just had a feeling that day he's going back to an area that he had done some recon in the previous weeks over in the Rochester Henrietta specific area. So I got on the phone with my buddies over in Rochester. So that was my first office. I was in the Rochester RA, and I was on the SWAT team over there in Buffalo. So the day that we did that surveillance, it was just like every other day.
It was just like every other day, until Peterson made an unexpected move.
We didn't think too much of it until he went and got that van that he had stolen from the military with the government plates still on it. And then they started heading west on the thruway.
Ronald Peterson and Mary Galvin were now in the Rochester area. Their daughter was with Mary in her car and Ronald in the van. They had already scouted several banks in the area and then split up at the Holiday Inn parking lot.
Then I got on with George Gass, the SWAT team leader, just to kind of give him a warning order, because I said, hey, if this guy goes operational, this is a shooter. He's a bad dude. I mean, we all knew that kind of in our hearts. And so we get over there and he goes into the parking lot by the hotel. And I just said, hey, Scott, why don't you go try to get a room there where you have overlook so we don't have a bunch of vehicles on them.
Scott Augenbaum was a special agent with the FBI at the time. He took up a surveillance position on Peterson from a nearby hotel room. He still remembers his words over the radio to the rest of the task force.
Guys, he's putting on a bulletproof vest, and I was able to see clips of ammunition, and just everything went silent on the radio, because I'm sure it took a couple of seconds for everyone to go, holy shit, this is game day.
He's sitting in the van, messing around with the van in the parking lot. Scott's watching him from the hotel, calling stuff out. And I remember the plane, being up and coming and going. SWAT team was in the ready. They were back at the RA. A bunch of the Rochester agents were out there on the road, and we linked up with them. We're talking on the radios with them because they knew the streets over there a little bit better than we did. And then pretty quickly, he went operational.
A separate surveillance team followed Mary Galvin as she drove away.
Mary went with the baby in their car, was gassing up, and we had a team on her because we had an arrest warrant for her.
Detective Chris Wood was watching Peterson from the sky, waiting for him to make his next move.
We knew where he was going to hit. Everybody was staged up. We stayed with him. It was right near Wegmans, if I remember right. All I saw was the van, that tan yellow van that he had.
From radio communications, he had changed into whatever outfit he was going to wear for that day. So someone had made the decision they were not going to wait for him to rob the bank. As he had progressed in these robberies, things had gotten a little more serious with him, and I think they were getting growing concerns that there was going to be more violence, and they decided to do the takedown. So I was assigned with a group to follow the wife, and that we would, at the same time he was going to be taken down, we would take her down. And she was about a mile away from where he was, and she had pulled into a gas station.
Both surveillance teams were ready to go. On the team watching Ronald Peterson, Rob Haley.
And so now the SWAT team is out there and the plane's calling them out. And then I'm listening to the separate radio, which was attack channel for the Buffalo SWAT team. We got an agent seeing him putting on a vest. You know, he's putting loaded magazines into the vest. He's prepping at least one weapon.
This was it. Law enforcement could not risk Peterson doing another bank robbery. It was time to move in.
He was looking down, they all said. And what he was doing, they think, was messing with the comms because he was having a problem talking to Mary over in the gas station. So he's looking down, not paying attention, engine running in park.
The SWAT team moved in.
And the guys in the front, you know, they all got MPs and M4s and shotguns. I mean, everybody's got long guns. And they put a vehicle in front of him, two vehicles beside him, and the big Bearcat blocking in the back. And he's got nowhere to go. But the windows are all up and the engine's running. And, you know, they're calling him out.
But you'll remember the psychology of this bank robber. Meticulous, organized, in control, always ready with an escape plan.
They get on the loudspeaker and they're telling him, hands up. And they said immediately he looks up and it's like a look on his face like, holy shit, how did you guys catch me? But also, I'm not giving up today. He's doing the hand thing. He's assessing. And then, so the hands started coming up and down. And, you know, he's saying, I can't hear you, wants to roll the window down. They're like, nope, just, you know, get out of the vehicle, hands up. And this is like a minute and a half of just this pregnant pause of he's not really listening. So the team leader says, break out the rear window and fire a flechette round, a smoke round. He fires a round and the bang of the shotgun goes into the rear window and doesn't penetrate the window. So another guy goes up, knocks out the window with a Kubaton, and then fires another round.
Peterson was no longer in control.
Guys in the front that could see him, they said when he heard those two shots, his face went to rage. And, you know, F this, I'm out of here. He had a column shifter on the steering wheel and pulled it down, put it into neutral. He was gunning the engine and then got it into drive, lurched forward, hit the blocking vehicle in the front. Everybody opened up. And the vehicle went careening off into the cinder block wall in the back of the plaza.
People at the mall and those who were passing by heard the gunfire and saw the commotion, but didn't really understand what was going on.
And people started coming out, and then they get 911 calls saying there's a gang war. There's a bunch of guys in black, and they just shot a guy in a van.
Detective Chris Wood was still watching all the chaos unfold from the plane.
All I saw was the van, that tan yellow van that he had. I just remember everybody surrounded it, the SWAT team surrounded it, and then it just drove right into the side of a building. I saw the glass coming out. And the pilot, he doesn't have the view that I had. He's like, what's going on? What's going on? And I'm like, I think they shot him.
The scene goes from chaos to an eerie silence as the SWAT team approaches the van. Ronald Peterson is still behind the wheel. But meanwhile, the other team was closing in on Mary.
We were really in close proximity to where she was pumping gas at the mobile gas station, and she was literally outside of her car. And so we were able to run quickly up to her, identify ourselves, and let her know that she was under arrest.
They discovered that Mary was armed.
The gun was placed, thinking it was a divided seat, in between the two seats in front, with a little girl in front as well, the 4-year-old little girl. There were several people at the gas station looking at us like, what is going on here? What are they doing to this poor woman? But when I pulled out a handgun, literally sitting next to the little girl, and really everything just changed when people saw that this was something that was really serious.
About 1 mile away, the SWAT team was still focused on Ronald Peterson and his van.
the glass was all busted out. The engine's kind of sputtering. They said, steam coming up.
One of the SWAT team members goes up to check for a pulse. There is none. But it's not over yet.
But then they see 3 hand grenades on his vest. And so then it goes into, okay, we need bomb teams here. Sphincter's up again. Everybody thinks it's over, and it wasn't quite over.
The bomb squad began checking out the contents of Peterson's van.
My memory was he had 3 live hand grenades and a smoke grenade on his front. He had a loaded, I don't know if it was a 45 or a 9. He had a long gun. He had a shotgun. Everything was loaded up, ready to go. And
the long gun was he had converted to full automatic.
The threat of Ronald Peterson was neutralized, and Mary Galvin was now in custody. Russ Johnson.
We were fortunate to have her pumping gas because, as she said after in the interview in Rochester, her husband told her to just shoot anybody who comes at you.
There was a sense of relief from both teams. It was finally over. Carl Reschke.
I also recall that when we're going to arrest Mary, there's an open mic, and you can hear the SWAT team lighting up the van. And I'm just listening to all that going, oh my. And then when she's in custody or whatever, the first phone call I made was to my wife to say, no matter what you hear, the task force is good.
Did the same thing, I think, and I told everybody, make sure if you got family that knows that you're over here today, let them know when you get a chance and get freed up, let them know you're good.
Mary Galvin is taken to the local FBI building for questioning while her daughter's being cared for by other cops. Retired FBI agent Scott Augenbaum.
When I went back to the RA, I was talking to Mary, and I didn't really know what happened at that time. And she goes, "Where's my husband?" And I said, "At this time, he's probably in police custody." And she looks at me and she goes, "You don't understand my husband. He swore he would never be taken alive."
Carl Reschke.
I conducted the interview with Mary back at the Rochester office, and Rob and I went back and forth about, should we tell her that he's dead? I think she'll unburden herself of all this stuff, knowing that he's no longer a threat to her.
Yep.
We kicked it around over a few minutes and then came to an agreement. I think we got to tell her. We've had nothing to lose. And then she just opened it all up. And that's how we learned about the other robberies that he had done that weren't bank related.
Yep.
The ATM, the car, and everything else like that.
And honestly, my perspective of that, she was relieved. There was relief. And it just was apparent that this wasn't her idea. It just seemed from the get-go, she was just a woman she fell in love with him, and he had gotten her involved in something that was way over her head. And I think she wanted out, but didn't know how to get out.
We'll talk more in a minute about how Mary Galvin cooperated with law enforcement, but as the day continued to unfold, there were still some loose ends. We had authorization to take the daughter to her grandparents' home in Syracuse. Myself, along with Russ Johnson, Carl Schmidt, and Scott Augenbaum, met with Mary Galvin's family. They had already received a short phone call from her saying that she had done some things she shouldn't have. And once we finished there, we went on to the Peterson home in Liverpool, where a search was already underway. After months of watching the home, doing drive-by surveillance, as well as watching a camera that we had on the street, this was my first look up close. It was a typical suburban neighborhood. The home, like any other on the block, single family, 2-story, living room, dining room, and child's bedroom on the first floor, with a spiral staircase to the second floor and the master bedroom. Peterson, Galvin, and their daughter fit in the neighborhood like an ordinary family. But this home was also an armory and an intelligence center. 2 loaded handguns were found in the master bedroom. I went to the office area just off the kitchen. A piece of wallboard had been removed that concealed a small room. Hanging on the wall inside was a radio headset, blasting caps, a telephone lineman's phone, long rifles, pistols, grenades, scanners, 2 bricks of C4 plastic explosive, dynamite, timers, fuses, and nearly 20,000 rounds of ammunition. We also found a Ronald Reagan mask. You may remember a movie called Point Break, which was released the same year that Ronald Peterson committed his first bank robbery in 1991. In the film, Patrick Swayze's a bank robber who wears a Ronald Reagan mask. His character is brazen, assertive, and in control. Similar to Peterson's MO, both use a getaway car and switch to another car to make their escape. Both taunt bank employees and assault customers, and both seem to view their heist as a game, at least in part. We don't know if Peterson was influenced by the film or if he even saw it, but the similarities are striking, including his increasingly violent behavior, which was supported by what we found at his residence. Our team remembered one of the potential apprehension plans for Peterson, which was to arrest him in the early morning at home. Even though that plan was not seriously considered, we all became aware of how dangerous and explosive that could have been once his arsenal was discovered. Scott Augenbaum.
The thing that really hit me emotionally the next day, which was going back to the house, being part of that search warrant and looking at all the stuff and looking at the sniper perch and going, holy crap, if we would have tried to make the arrest at the house, oh my God, things would have been different.
Yeah, that would have been really bad. Bad tactical.
20,000 rounds of ammunition.
And then the upstairs bedroom, he had built shooting positions with a ladder that he could retract. So if you went in the front door or back door, he had great fields of fire on you. He set that thing up to defend, in place, and final hoorah if we ever went there.
Mary Galvin had been released on bail and became a cooperative witness. She not only confessed to her role, but also to her husband's activities in many of the robberies, including that ATM robbery we mentioned earlier from June of 1994, where the two female employees were tied up and terrorized. John Winslow.
I didn't think that was part of the pattern. Jim Ranella was convinced it was, and he obviously was right.
In this robbery, two female employees were loading an ATM with cash. One of the employees goes outside to test the machine.
One goes out to test it to make sure that it works. She looks at the peephole, sees nothing, opens the door, and this bush confronts her.
This bush was Douglas Peterson, who had suddenly emerged from the tree line wearing a ghillie suit, a shaggy camouflage full-body covering used by snipers and hunters to blend into natural growth like grass, bushes, and shrubs. The woman is shocked when the robber appears out of nowhere and forces her back inside at gunpoint. But that pales in comparison to what happens next.
He knows her name, he knows her child's name, and he knows where the child is kept for daycare. And says, if you give any trouble, we'll kill your little girl.
The women comply with his demands. They're both bound, and bags are placed over their heads. Then they both hear something even more terrifying. The robber fires a shot.
And they really shook them up because each one thought the other one was murdered and that they would be next.
During the investigation, it wasn't clear if Ronald Peterson was involved in this particular robbery for a couple of reasons.
Because the guy just didn't fit Ron's description, although a lot of the other details of the robbery, that he had a New England accent.
But Ronald Peterson was involved. He was the getaway driver in this heist, while his own brother, Douglas Peterson, terrorized the two female employees. And throughout the robbery, Doug was getting updates about any police activity from Ron, overheard by one of the tellers using the code name Bulldog.
We didn't know it at the time, but he was talking to his brother on the radio, and the brother told him that there's a lot of cops around the area.
And while Doug Peterson was getting updates from his brother by radio, he was packing cash into bags, and then he makes his exit. A short distance from the bank, two witnesses reported seeing a man in a ghillie suit getting into the passenger side of a cream-colored van. The Peterson brothers made off with more than $80,000 in that heist. Mary Galvin also agreed to help us catch the other bank robber, her brother-in-law Douglas Peterson. She invited him to her home in Liverpool, where a surveillance team would install a microphone.
And then PJ says, I want to set up a camera too. And I said, oh, geez, we don't need it. She said, well, let me do it anyways.
So they wired the house. It was a few days after Christmas, and Doug and his family were driving in from Maine. But they showed up a little sooner than expected.
As Doug and his wife and two boys pull up, if you remember the house, there was a driveway to the maybe north side. They were coming in the back door. Simultaneously, Phil and Colby are coming out the front door, just having put the electronics together.
Doug didn't see the agents, but he was still cautious, and he may have suspected that the house was bugged. So the camera they installed was important.
We did need it because Doug wouldn't say anything. He was writing on a pad, and he would show it to Mary. She did very good. She got him to admit things, and if we didn't have that video, it would have been a lot tougher. I mean, we would have gotten him, but.
After leaving Mary's home, Doug Peterson heads to his motel, the Super 8 in Liverpool, where myself, Carl Schmidt, Russ Johnson, and investigator Jim Rogers were staged. We were unsure if he was armed. We knew he had been in the past and had used a gun in at least one of the robberies. And when we got the signal, we moved in. Russ Johnson.
When we took him down, I pulled the notepad out of his back pocket.
The same notebook he had just been using to write notes back and forth to Mary back at her home. And written right on the front page of that notebook, the words, "Don't mention me and money."
And within, I think, a month, he pled guilty. And Doug loved his older brother, wanted to, be like him, but he wasn't. He didn't have the heart of a bank robber, but he did two jobs with him.
For all of the bank robberies between 1991 and 1996, more than $300,000 in cash was stolen, equivalent to $600,000 today. And for the victims left in the wake, the bank employees, customers, and civilians who were shot at, that terror has not gone away. Former Detective Chris Wood.
I will say this, one of my friends was a teller at Marine Midland Bank at Glen Crossing there, and she was there when he robbed the place. And I was talking to her, and she brought up, just out of the blue, she mentioned about being robbed. And I'm like, oh, it was the closing time Bandit. And I explained to her that I was part of this task force, and I asked her if she'd like to know a little bit more about it. She turned white. She didn't want to know anything about it. Here it is 25, 30 years later, and it still really bothers her. And I think that's something you miss when us as cops, we don't really understand how it affects people that were victimized. And I felt bad, and I apologized where I didn't want to bring up any bad memories for her, because I don't look at it as a bad memory. This was an interesting thing. But for her, it was real tough for her to even talk about it. So a lot of people were very affected by it, including my friend.
Retired Detective Valerie Brogan.
I met someone through where my daughters went to school, and she was in one of the banks. She was a teller, and she shared with me, how shaken up she was as a result of what occurred.
Douglas Peterson was sentenced to almost 11 years in prison. Records show that he was released in 2006. Mary Galvin pleaded guilty to a single count of conspiracy and was sentenced to 18 months in prison plus restitution. Records show that she was released in 1998. Peterson's daughter was raised by other family members during Mary's incarceration. We're not identifying her, but we're happy to say that she went on to earn an excellent education and built a career dedicated to helping others. For the seasoned investigators of the Bank Robbery Task Force, we all describe Ronald Peterson as one of the most notorious bank robbers we've ever encountered.
He was probably the best bank robber we had around here that I could think of. And because it was, even by New York City standards, it was most bank robberies we had in New York City was like a couple $1,000s. They were junkies or drunks, crackheads, very few real pro bank robbers. A few gangs, but not like this guy. This guy was the best, certainly best up in central New York.
The members of the Bank Robbery Task Force all agree. The experiences we shared during the summer of 1996 are still etched in our memories. Carl Reschke.
I did 25 years with the Sheriff's Department, and some of the best cases you had were you're collaborating with other agencies.
Former FBI agent Rob Haley.
The best cases that I had the pleasure of working on in my FBI career, 25 and a half years, were task force cases with our state or local partners, other federal agencies on some of them. And I would say 5 I can think of off the top of my head that I was involved with in my career. This one's right up there at the top of the list. It was a pleasure working with all you guys.
Retired Onondaga County Sheriff's Detective Val Brogan.
It was a true credit to working with talent from so many agencies because, Mark, like I started to say, you were from Fulton Police Department, Oswego County. We worked with state police, sheriff's departments from 2 different counties, local, town, and village. And everybody rallied. That's a great memory for me because that was a very, very unique case.
A case where the evidence spoke for itself. A serial bank robber armed and not afraid to shoot. And his background in law enforcement and the military made him a concerning adversary. And, like Agent Winslow described, Peterson was not impulsive. He was scheming, methodical, and he was committed at all costs.
Carl and I interviewed Mary well after that. She said that he told her that if he was with Mary and the little girl, that if the police closed in, he would shoot them both and then shoot out with the police.
And again, we were dealing with someone who had a law enforcement background, a military background. And again, he was growing very aggressive, and it just seemed like he was starting to, spiral a little bit, or he was gaining more and more confidence that he thought he was smarter than everybody else. He thought he was going to get away with this forever. I really believe that. It worked out, and he made his choice. I mean, that at the end of the day, I always say that, hey, he had the option. He could have given up, but nope, he made the choice. That's what happens.
I want to personally recognize the members of the Bank Robbery Task Force, all who have since retired. For many of you, this was a career-defining case, but it's just one example of the caliber of work you provided to the communities you served. And thank you for coming back to share your stories and for your dedication, not just on this case, but throughout your careers. We also remember 2 members of the task force who are no longer with us, FBI Special Agent Phil Looney and New York State Police Investigator Jim Rogers. Their dedication, courage, and contributions are woven into the legacy of this investigation. Be sure to check out photos, a timeline, maps, and the blog for this episode on the Behind the Badge section at apbcoldcase.com.
You're listening to APB Behind the Badge, an original Spawn Group production.